What's going on, everybody? Dr. Andrew Fix back from Physio Room for another episode on the code. I feel a little out of my routine. It's been a little while since I did one of these. Hopefully not feeling too rusty or anything, but I'm really looking forward to getting into this conversation with one of my friends and one of our team members here at Physio Room, Dr. Tim Tracy. You may have heard Dr. Tim on our ACL reconstruction podcast that we did a couple months ago, but as a reminder, Tim is one of our board certified orthopedic specialists in physical therapy. Though he's helped a ton of clients in his career with all sorts of issues, specifically, Tim specializes in working with cyclists, cycling related issues, knee pain, back pain, neck pain, you name it, improving your cycling performance. And he's a bike fitting specialist on our team here at Physio Room. So Tim, thanks so much for joining me, buddy. I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
Great being here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I appreciate the intro.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, you're our specialist on cycling related issues. You do bike fittings in our office. And you guys, that's what we're going to get into a little bit today on, what are bike fittings? What are they for? Who needs one? Why are they beneficial for you? But before we dive too much into that, Tim, we just sort of do a brief little recap again of yourself if someone hasn't listened to that ACL podcast, and just give a brief background of yourself. And then we'll get right into it.
Thanks. So like my history, 10 plus years of PT has been just, general orthopedics, a lot of sports related injuries. I was worked at the University of Missouri as a PT working with gymnastics and women's soccer teams. And so, the issues that I saw there definitely overlapped with the cyclists that I have been working with and have worked with since PT school. So, now my practice is a blend of my main pursuits, outside of my family life. Of course, my main pursuits are cycling and serving my clients. And so I have that specific focus on cycling related issues, cycling performance, and bike fitting.
Yeah, absolutely love it. And, it's pretty cool when you get to blend those things together, like you said, and it's not too often that you get to see someone's passion driving their career. A lot of times people are just in jobs that, that afford their living, and a lot of their passion and their pursuits are outside of their work. But when you get to pull those two things together, it's pretty fun. And, we have those niche specific providers on our team here at Physio Room, you being the cycling guy. When was it that that you really got into cycling as a sport and an activity that, that you started to really enjoy it and do it more and more?
It was in PT school. So, I grew up like soccer and motocross were my main two weekend activities. Played college soccer as well. So PT school, gave me some like more insight on overall health, the physiology, nutrition, just general wellness. And so, once I had the time and funds available, which is definitely a barrier with cycling, then it just kind of came together as, just a blend of like everything I enjoyed with life, which is outside the skill set from motocross, the anaerobic ability associated with that. And then, the aerobic, background with soccer as well. So like cycling is just like the ultimate blend for like a lifelong activity, and getting out and just having like an outlet to stay balanced in life.
Absolutely. And it's been about, we're closing in on 2 years now, right? That you've been at Physio Room, or am I off on that?
Yep. No, next month will be 2 years.
Awesome. Well, let's just dive right into it, Tim. Let's start talking about bikes. Let's start talking about what a bike fit is. And, I'm right there with you. I got into cycling when I was in PT school, but my cycling journey has been kind of like on and off throughout the last 8 years, I guess now. I think it was in 2014 that I traveled for one of my clinical rotations to Minneapolis, and they have a great bike path system, and was riding a road bike all around. And then if I fast forward, that bike eventually ended up getting stolen, and that threw a little wrench in my plans because, like you said, as a college student, didn't quite have the funds. So I replaced that bike with a much, much cheaper one, and still was riding that around a bit. But then the deeper I got into my career, the less I was biking. I wasn't prioritizing finding time to bike until I moved out here to Colorado. And now I've had the opportunity to go through a couple bike fit sessions with you on different types of bikes, but as like a high level overview, like what is a bike fit and why does someone need one, or why would you tell someone that it's beneficial to do a bike fitting session?
So, the internet will tell you that it's a mysterious dark hole full of nuances and uncertainty, which is partly true. But I'd say, like, when performed well, I tell people it's the avenue for any rider to obtain the full enjoyment of riding their bike. Aside from getting decent shoes, which is another rabbit hole as well in cycling, and a quality helmet. Bike fit is the first thing anyone should do after investing after a bike purchase. The sticker shock with a bike is often pretty great with entry level or novice riders, and so the thought of another couple $100 to get this thing set up for me is frequently overlooked. So, but bike fitting is, bike manufacturers use adjustable, interchangeable components, so their bikes can be made to accommodate a larger cross section of riders. And so a trained bike fitter knows which adjustments need to be made to each of these components so that the contact interfaces are relatively seamless with each person.
Yeah.
So essentially, there's 3 points of contact when you're on the bike. Your hands, the saddle, the seat, and the feet. And the ultimate goal is after a bike fit for the rider to never really put much thought into those areas. I'd say outside of focusing on the riding technique, which is another thing that people don't really have a lot of awareness of.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you bring up, because you work with a lot of cyclists. I work with some too, but I work with more runners on my caseload. And I think a lot of people just, when we're young, we're kind of born with this innate ability to run. But as we age, as we spend a lot of time sedentary in schools and work and whatnot, a lot of people just think that people should know how to run. But if you watch 10 different people run, you're going to see 10 different running techniques, 10 different gait cycles. I think the same thing is probably true for cycling. You just assume that you just hop on the bike and you just pedal, and there's only one way to do it. But like you just said, not everybody has a very efficient cycling technique just like drilled in and dialed in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, cycling is just so seemingly benign that obviously I hop on the bike. This is how you pedal a bike, but
it really depends on the day.
There are just nuances galore about how to do that the most efficient way.
Yeah.
And there's just not as much literature about pedaling technique. It's not in the mainstream literature as well. And just the body of scientific literature in general pales with cycling compared to running, compared to knee pain, compared to other health related factors. So
yeah,
there isn't a robust body of evidence that people can relate to, that practitioners can relate to. So a lot of it is experience and knowledge that helps the people, to help them refine these, help their cycling pattern, cycling team.
Yeah. And I think, probably most people that will tune in to listen to this podcast, even if you're not a cyclist, you will be able to relate to what I'm about to say. Everybody probably knows the feeling of hopping in to drive your spouse's car or drive a rental car. And what's the first thing that you do when you get in there? You adjust the seat forward and back, up and down. You adjust the back of the seat. You adjust the mirrors. You adjust the steering wheel. Like, you adjust all the parts that are capable to be adjusted so that the car is set up to the size and shape of your body, so that the seatbelt fits nice, so that you can see where you need to see, so that driving is going to be as comfortable as possible. The same thing is true for cycling, right? Like, you need to adjust that bike as best as possible to fit the function of your body, your height, your weight, your shape, length of your arms and legs, etc. So obviously, like, that's a lot of what's taking place in these bike fits with Tim. But like you just sort of alluded to, Tim, someone goes out and spends their hard-earned money on a bike, whether it's new or used, mountain, gravel road, whatever that is. and maybe they don't want to invest those next couple $100 into doing a proper bike fit. And just like we would love to work with people proactively here at Physio Room rather than waiting until something starts to bother them, would you say that it's true that a lot of times when people end up coming in for a bike fit, it's because something is not feeling optimal in their cycling?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
if people are feeling good, it's just like physical therapy in general. They're going to keep on trucking. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's more like high level cyclists that are going to really want to hone in their positioning so that they can maximize like their economy and maximize their comfort and longevity.
Yeah.
And so those are usually ones that are more proactive. And so sometimes they'll have issues, say 6 hours into a ride, and that's when those are the
Yeah.
issues they want to work out. And we look at take a different approach for those cyclists. But ultimately, if people aren't experiencing significant issues, then they're just leaving a lot on the table as far as like the maybe discomforts they have that they kind of brush aside, like, and think that that's normal part of cycling. And
Mm-hmm.
that's especially true for people to say, my age and older. Just the dogmatic thinking that dies hard is numbness in your saddle region, your hands, or whatever. It's just that's just part of riding a bike, and you got this little seat, and it's going
Yeah.
to be uncomfortable no matter what. And
Mm-hmm.
that is not the case at all. So there should be, that's what I'm saying, like you shouldn't have to put much thought into those contact points regardless of how long you're riding. Once people
Yeah.
crest 5 or 6 hours, the body doesn't like a static position no matter how perfect you're set up. So that's where we look at off the bike patterns and
Mm-hmm.
their inherent positional awareness when they in position for that long versus changing it up, big
Yeah.
changes on the bike setup. So that's really helping to mitigate that dogmatic thinking.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned right there in that explanation potential numbness in the saddle region, in the hands where your pressure points are. In addition to those things, what would you say are some of the most common issues that cyclists are often dealing with that potentially lead them in the door for something like a bike fit, if they didn't already get it, when they purchased
Yeah.
their bicycle?
So the level of cycling is going to pretty much dictate the issues they have, but across the board, I'd say low back pain is probably the number one driver for people. Low back and hip, I'll kind of lump those together.
Yeah.
So more novice beginners will tend to have a lot of saddle seat issues, and a lot of that is due to kind of the positioning and to think that they need a big cushy seat in order to be comfortable. If their car seat's comfy, then obviously they need something that simulates that. So it's getting them in a position to recognize that we don't want them really upright, because that's going to put a lot of pressure on that little area, and getting that counterintuitive approach to having weight distributed well between their feet, saddle, and hands will unload that pressure.
Yeah.
But then for more serious cyclists, then that's when I'll see like one-sided issues in their knee, their hip, coming up the neck as well. And that is likely like a background is that they're going to have some issues off the bike. And people that bike a lot tend to don't do like a well-rounded or comprehensive training program. And so any niggles or asymmetries that they're going to have off the bike are just going to be slowly compounded on the bike. And so it'll be knee, hip, and low back pain are kind of the things I'll see with higher level riders.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense hearing you explain that, because I would say, just thinking of the cyclists, particularly the serious ones that I've had the opportunity to work with in the clinic, those are pretty much the things that they're dealing with, knee, and not necessarily in this order, but knee pain, back pain, neck pain, hip issues are probably the things that I've heard the most. And I would agree with you that we see issues in those things in the clinic. even if they're not on their bike, right? So now I know that's something that you look at when a person comes in to see you for a bike fitting session. Just kind of like paint the outline picture of like, what does that look like? Because I know you don't just look at people on their bike, you look at them off of their bike as well.
No, definitely not. So, just going back, there is, some, relic thinking that again dies hard as far as, the biomechanics of the body. Just relate that to, the static sizing of the bike. And if your knee angles and hip angles are in a good position, well, then should be set up. But, unfortunately, the fact that the components overlooked is the central nervous system, and that we all are going to move differently. And those unique differences need to be looked at functionally, and how people move off the bike will often mirror how they move on the bike. So if they have a knee that dives in when they're doing a squat or a single leg squat, that will be almost 100% evident on the bike. So when someone comes in for a fit, we don't just hop on the bike. We, just like any good healthcare practitioner, we want to know that patient's story. We want to know their subjective. We want to know their goals. So, and especially for cycling, is because the direction we're going to go for their setup is going to be dictated by the demands of the event that they're going for. There's so many unique cycling niches that someone can come in with a cyclocross bike, but they're wanting to do long distance gravel rides, and so this setup for those two disciplines is going to be totally different. So whereas the cross bike's going to really be focused on the handling, the gravel bike's going to be more set up for comfort and longevity. And so I want to know about them, their goals. I want to know about injuries, any issues they're having, current, previous, current issues, prior injuries they have, things that they're having off the bike as well. Because again, that'll be until they're like doing well, like pain wise and function wise off the bike, then the likelihood of them doing well for extended periods on the bike, again, is not great.
Yeah.
So once we kind of establish that and get a baseline about their expectations for the fit, is it to be more aero? Is it just comfort? Is it performance? Or is it just to get out of pain? Is it to ride with their kids? So all these things, I gotta know where each person stands, and so that we know where we want to go. And again, that's like not a lot different than a typical PT initial evaluation. However, it contrasts greatly from what some bike fits are, the sequence that are offered, say, in some bike shops. It wasn't something that was a component of the first fits that I had in my cycling career, where there's like hop on, looks good, see you later. So they definitely want to give a real comprehensive subjective component for each person. So then once we kind of establish that, then that's when we get moving. And it's not on the bike. I want to look at their function, combined with the stability, flexibility, mobility. And see if that, how that relates to their symptoms, if they are having any. So, so if they want to get, real aerodynamic on their bike, and, they have like terrible mobility, terrible flexibility, they can't hip hinge really well, they don't have good lunge pattern, then those are things that are going to compromise their current fit. Yeah, we have a direction we want to go, but it's seeing like, hey, your movement patterns aren't really at the place they need to be so that you can function well on the bike. But so that's what we want to highlight and tease out before we even hop on the bike.
Yeah, and that makes good sense. So to just recap that beginning part, so someone comes in, before you even get started doing anything, you want to understand who they are, where they've been, what their goals are, and then look at the person from a functional assessment standpoint first before you even even put the bike up on the trainer and get them set up on their bike. So, okay, so say you go through that portion, you go through that beginning half of the assessment, find the things that you find, talk about those, and then you reach the point where, okay, now we're going to get your bike set up. We're going to get you up on your bike. We're going to get your shoes on, and we're going to start to assess you on the bicycle. What does that process look like?
Yeah, so I want to get them on the bike, and then that's where I'm going to see their pedaling technique. I'll do like a pretty light resistance, and I want to see, if they're are they able to pedal at a high cadence without being real choppy? Are they pedaling squares? Do we hear like the trainer, catching the cane catching with each pedal stroke? And that's what we'll see, is that they don't have that fluidity. And so that's what I want to kind of tease out. Or, is it one side that we hear that constant chain slap in the trainer? And so seeing that, and then so what I'll do is I'll record them. I have an app, and then we'll get them from the side, from the front, and from behind, and I'm looking at pretty much like, what is their pelvic stability like? And so that's going to dictate up and down the chain about how they, the control they have, pushing through the pedals. Is that going to dictate them putting too much pressure on their hands? Are they going to be rounded and their neck hunched? And, again, these asymmetries as far as, is one leg dropping down a little bit further on one side versus the other? Do they have more, their toes pointing a little bit more on one side versus the other? And again, like, these are things as far as like things that I'm going to likely have picked up in their functional movement off the bike.
Yeah.
And then I can kind of go, have a direction where what I'm looking for when they first hop on. And then can start to like coach them about, hey, here's some things that with your movement that you have to be able to do well, because no matter which direction that we go with these changes, until we can have you moving well, making the most, and having awareness about how to interact with the seat and the handlebars and the pedals, there's still going to be some things that aren't going to be fully resolved. And that's what is often the case, is like people get a fit somewhere, but they don't get instruction about, hey, here's why you're having pain on one side. They'll say, okay, well, this guy moved the stem 2 millimeters this way, and the guy moved it 2 millimeters this way, or I was worse off from what I was before. And so those are the things like, okay, here's, why we're doing this first, is really give you a holistic approach to be a better functioning human off and on the bike.
Yeah. 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 And I love that. And you're totally right that, having that look beforehand where you assess the person clues you in to like things that you're expecting to see or planning to take a deeper look at when the person's finally on the bike. Now, and I know, hopefully this, what I'm about to ask you doesn't prove to be a difficult question, because I know the answer is extremely different for every person. But, when you get someone on the bike, though, how you're going to potentially, if you're going to adjust anything on the bike with them or for them to improve what that video looks like, improve their ability to pedal efficiently and whatnot. There's a lot of different moving components on these bicycles. Would you say that you tend to see a trend with like the types of adjustments that you see yourself making with people? Is it like you tend to see that you're moving the seat this way or that way? You tend to change one thing more than the other? Are you noticing any trends with the fits that you're doing?
Yes, absolutely. So it does kind of, those patterns that we see do kind of relate to different demographics and different types of riders. So it's like a lot of road riders I've seen lately that they want to make the most power that they can. So their seat is going to be relatively forward and low. And so that's going to just bias your quad muscles, going to give you like more leverage as you're pressing down through the power phase. And it also tends to add a lot of patellar shear to your knees. And so if you don't have like good balance, good technique to be able to load distribute as far as using all the muscles in your legs, including your glutes and hamstrings, and have good pelvic stability, that's a good recipe for knee pain. So, what I'll tend to do the most is bringing their seat up and back so that we can get them in a place where they have, first, like good pelvic stability, and two, having good recruitment of their glutes. And so that doesn't necessarily mean feeling their glutes working with each pedal stroke. It just means we're putting their body, they're putting their tissues in a position where the muscles are going to be in a advantageous position. So that's, for that demographic, that's what tend to do a lot. But ultimately, it's about having, like you alluded to, there's a lot of moving parts. There's a ton of variables. The bike, it just makes this just exponentially more challenging than often like a running gait analysis, for me personally.
Yeah,
But
I would say the same. What was that last part? Sorry, I interrupted you there.
Oh, just like having a method as far as like, here's the route I'm going to go through to make sure I don't overlook things. I'm not cutting corners. I want to make sure that everything is accounted for. And that often that starts at the cleat and the foot interface and then working our way up. And so, but often, another thing is like people is, asking like, how the previous fitters or how they set up their shoes. And I'm like, I don't know. No one's really looked at it, put it on there and started going. Like, that is one place that I spend a lot of time, is like getting that foot interface set up well, because that's going to dictate, everything on up the chain.
Yeah, absolutely. And being someone who, I would say that I'm quite proficient in doing running gait analyses. Like you just said, there's a bit more that goes into a bike fitting procedure than a running gait analysis. And although, whenever a well-trained physical therapist or any other type of coach that's doing a running analysis, hopefully they're looking at how that person moves, not just in running, but in other movement patterns too, squats, hinging, etc., looking at their mobility and stability. I know that process of me being able to go through an assessment of the human and an assessment of their running doesn't take nearly the time that one of these really thorough, well thought out bike fitting procedures takes. So, typically, how long is one of these appointments that someone's coming in for this thorough bike fitting analysis?
So, I'll allocate, usually 2.5 hours. If someone, again, like if they're just looking to, I got a new bike and want to get set up, not have any issues, versus someone has a history of orthopedic issues and having like significant discomfort, and that's going to just really change things up. We have to, I don't want to make a whole bunch of changes at once. We have to make one subtle change, see how they respond, make another one, and if we're changing parts and having them on and off the bike, it can take a fair amount of time. There's just a lot of things to consider, and if people are rushed through this, then things are going to be overlooked, and the outcome isn't going to be ideal. So some of them that I've had, when people have lots of pains, issues with their feet, knees, low back, it can take up to 3 hours, and sometimes I want to break that up too. It's like, here's we made quite a few changes. We want to try these out for a while. We want to let your nervous system adapt to these changes. So, if you're way off the mark as far as like, things are significantly out of balance, and, they're way out of the bell curve, I'm not going to just like take them all the way to where I think they should be, because people typically don't respond well to these big changes. We want to make some little changes and show them the trend that we want to make, and hopefully make some improvements there. And then I want to see how they do for 6 rides, let them get adapted to this position, and then we can kind of touch base and then see if we want to come back in, or if there's just a few things that they can change on their own. So that is one thing that's different than previous fits, is like the communication afterwards. I want to know, like, how they responded, because obviously they're going to be moving and feeling better, in the clinic, in the studio. But, how does that manifest into the real world when they're on their bike for 3 hours? So, yeah, so how each person handles a 3 hour ride is going to be dictated on a lot of variables. And so we want them understanding that if they are moving better, they have better awareness coupled with the change that we made, that ultimately will get them in a better place. But we want to have feedback about, any other observations that they notice.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that process, Tim, is so important because I've had the opportunity to go through, I think, 3 bike fits with you now. We've done 2 road bikes, one that I no longer have, and the gravel bike that I have. And it took a little while. The most recent road bike that I added to my collection now, I rode it several times before I was able to schedule a time to come in and do a bike fit with you. And even being a physical therapist and even having gone through a previous bike fit with you, we know the bikes are different. And I have functional limitations in how my body moves and things. One thing that I was definitely starting to notice is, I was getting some knee pain on that bike, and it wasn't anything that was like dramatic. I wasn't having like intense knee pain. We'll call it more like left knee discomfort. And particularly after I was on the bike for like 45 to 60 minutes or something like that. Like I didn't feel it right away. And I made some little adjustments and things while I was waiting for the appointment that I had scheduled with you to like come in and actually do that bike fit. But, I think it's important to, like you said, make those small changes and then go test them out so you can see what kind of an effect and change they're actually having on how you're feeling. Because if you changed a bunch of things all at once, or you keep changing things every time you ride, you're never really going to know when you find a position that is comfortable long term.
Right. And so, it's understanding that when you change one thing on a bike fit, you change everything.
Mm-hmm.
So if say, for instance, people, if they're having knee pain and they slide their saddle back and that offloads that patellar shear in their knees. However, what that, can do is it increases the reach. And so then if that is then too far of a reach, well, then that can contribute to, pelvic instability, low back pain. They can make them hunch their neck because they're reaching too far. And so that's important to understand. And that's why it's important to have a methodical approach to understanding about what the consequences of each change are, positive or negative, so that you're not just hunting around and moving it this and then that in a haphazard fashion. And to your second point, I've had people who are like, oh, I've changed. Man, I had a guy a couple weeks ago, and he changed something every ride,
Mm-hmm.
and that goes back into the variables that are inherent with cycling. And when you go for a run, you can feel different each time, but ultimately you have to allow your nervous system to adapt to a certain position.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if we're in the ballpark and you've had these, you're still wanting to fiddle with it. Again, we have to look off the bike. If, is like, what is it? And so that's the thing is like, he had this significant valgus with his knee, and so he had just basically a ton of weakness on one leg, which I highlighted beforehand, like, hey, this is a big component. If you can bike well for a little while, I'll be impressed, but as you get fatigued, these movement patterns are gonna be magnified.
Yeah, for sure. And I would totally say that like the value or the benefit, I guess, that I have perceived, like how I feel on the bike, both from a comfort standpoint and from like an efficiency standpoint, a power standpoint, or sustained ability to bike for longer and whatnot, and not feel as fatigued in like certain spots, has been like night and day since like riding without the bike fit versus riding with the bike fit. And it now, having gone through it, it seems like a no-brainer, but that's talking with experience, because I never had a bike fit years ago. When I started riding, I was just fiddling with things, trying to adjust things until it just felt just right. And so yeah, I think the benefits of it in my mind, far exceed the the cost that it takes to do one of these things, because it's just been tremendously useful.
So that cost component, that's one thing, especially as people get into cycling more and they, see all these shiny objects and, oh, I can get lighter bars, I can shave a few grams here. That cycling marketing is a powerful force, and like, oh man, I want this, or I want my bike to look like this. But, understanding that, what like economy actually is, and if you're looking to optimize power or your fitness level, there's three metrics that must be developed through training: your aerobic capacity, your anaerobic threshold, and your economy. And how efficiently you use oxygen while riding is, what economy is. And so if you have a sloppy pedaling technique or an improperly fitted bike, that's going to cause unnecessary fatigue on a long race or ride. And that's why coaches typically place so much emphasis on having a professional bike fit at least annually and doing neuromuscular drills every season, so that you're, the most likely energy saving benefit will come from a bike fit versus spending endless amounts of money on carbon and shiny objects.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so funny to hear you say that, because it makes good sense when you explain it. But like you said, marketing is a very powerful tool, and shiny things in our mind are hard to pass up sometimes. But, the same thing is, I talk about this with runners all the time. Like, you could buy whatever pair of shoes you want. Those shoes are not necessarily going to make you a better or a faster runner. The majority of the benefits that you're going to get in your running come from everything else other than your shoes. And, that couple ounces difference in your shoes, or that carbon plate, or whatever we're talking about, makes the smallest fraction of a difference. And what you started to mention earlier, Tim, was that a lot of times people that are very avid cyclists don't always have a well-rounded fitness routine outside of cycling. What are some of the other things that you would recommend that cyclists do outside of riding their bike or riding their Peloton or their stationary trainer or whatever? Because I think I have that conversation with cyclists in our office a lot, as well as with runners in our office, about the things that they need to do outside of their sport in order to better set them up for their performance in their sport.
Well, it's going back to just moving well in life. And so, our basic primal movement patterns are squat, press, pull, lunge, and hinge. And hinge and lunge are basically what cycling comprises. So that's part of my, fit assessment is, can you do a hip hinge? What does your lunge pattern look like? Can you disassociate your pelvis from your trunk, from your legs, and like do a pelvic tilt? And that's, what we have to have is people being able to, when they're riding for multiple hours, can you address, when you get fatigued, can you modify your pelvic position? So off the bike, I want them, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It does, like the 4 greatest exercises from cycling.com don't necessarily relate to each person. It doesn't have to be, real glamorous. It's like, can you do these basic things and do them well, do them under load, do them when fatigued?
Yeah.
And if so, then the chances of that transferring into your sport are really good. And can you address asymmetries? And because, everyone's going to be a little bit weaker, a little less unstable on one side. And when that difference becomes a certain amount, then that's going to load the tissues inappropriately, and that's what's going to lead to pain. So the better balance you can be off the bike with, bilateral hip hinge, single leg RDL, doing lunges, doing those well with, good pelvic stability, with good glute recruitment and awareness, that will inherently make you a better rider. If it's not for like a power and force production standpoint, it is from a movement awareness and resilience standpoint in order to ride, endure a long ride, endure the season, and, ride for the rest of your life if you want. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the things that I, really, really trying to emphasize. And that's part of the fit. It's like, here's the biggest deficit, that each person rides. And here's what one thing you need to at least do off the bike to address the things that we found in your assessment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. And you just started to go down this path. Something that I wanted to ask you about was, you just said, like, if you can improve your movements off the bike, address those asymmetries, you're going to improve your resilience and your ability to tolerate the demands of cycling, whether that's, recover from, whether that's tolerate the season or cycling longevity. And I know you just put together the materials for a 7 principles for cycling longevity ebook. Just very briefly touch on that. And then either you or I can tell people where they can find that, because a lot of the things that you touched on in this conversation can also be found in that ebook. So we'll make sure to share that as a resource for people as well.
So it's 7 big things, and what it starts with is just globally. It's like, can you do like a diaphragmatic breath? Can people get out of what I call like stress state breathing, which is just using their upper chest and using their upper trap and using their pec minor to expand the rib cage, and not utilizing their diaphragm to the fullest extent. And so that can have implications as far as systemically, biomechanically. That's just the foundation of riding well, as far as doing well in life, is like, can you breathe? And then the other parts are, can people do like a hip hinge with a pelvic tilt, and being able to lunge and being able to modify their position on the bike. So those are just kind of the general components of that.
Mm-hmm.
And just giving people some videos and some cues so they can see like what these things look like in practice.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll go ahead and we will share that in the show notes for this episode. Again, Tim created an ebook for you guys that has video demonstrations of a lot of the things that we were just going through in this conversation. And if you don't find it in the show notes, but you're listening to this while you're driving or something, and you want to go find that later, that resource can also be found on our Physio Room website. So you're going to visit PhysioRoomCo, that's co.com, and up in that top navigation bar, we have a section that's called free resources, where you can find that ebook along with several other things that for other types of activities that can just provide you with some free information and give you some of the detail that may not come through in the back and forth conversation that we're having. Tim, to talk about a little bit of fun stuff from a cycling perspective, are there any events or races or anything that you are training for and preparing for right now as we're going into winter here in Colorado?
Well, I'm in the lottery to do the Leadville 100 this year. Ooh. So we'll know in a few weeks if that's going to be on the docket. In the winter, I try and get a little more balanced as far as getting the weight room and running. And so I'm doing a trail run actually tomorrow, doing
nice.
I think 9 miles, which is a little longer than I've done in a while. So I try to stay fairly balanced throughout the season, but it was what I preached to everyone else, but I tend to fall off the wagon just like everyone else and just tend to ride my bike. So these are the months when I try and balance out my life. But yeah, just Leadville for cycling this year, and then I'll probably do some other 12-hour rides. I have one in Winter Park and one in Castle Rock. Those are the main ones, and then I'll kind of fill in some gaps with some other rides in the Front Range. And
yeah, awesome. Well, I want to get out on another ride with you. Tim and I haven't been able to ride together too much since we've both been out here, and I would be the first to admit that I am what I would call a fair weathered cyclist. So you probably won't see me outside too much on the bike during the colder, wetter, darker months of the winter. But when you get a nice day out here in Colorado, you probably can find me outside on my bike. And so let's get that scheduled sometime soon, Tim. And like you said, as much as we hop on this podcast, I do all these episodes, I have this interview with you, we are humans too, and we fall off the wagon and fall out of our routine just like everybody else. And honestly, that's one of the fun things for me about having these conversations and doing this show, that it keeps me kind of talking about the things and trying to practice what we preach, because, knowing what to do is a whole lot harder than implementing it in your life and then holding yourself accountable to doing it. So, thank you guys for listening to us on this platform, letting us use this platform to try to put into action some of the things that we're talking about too. We're doing this totally with you, not just talking at you or for you. So we're doing this together. But Dr. Tim, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I want you to remind everybody, where can people find you? And we'll put those resources in the show notes too. But where can people find you and follow up with you after they listen to this?
So Instagram is kind of my main spot where I'll put any of the cycling journeys I go on. So it's Physio Tim T. And then I'll have all my clients feel free to reach out to me via email, tim@physioroomco.com.
That's awesome. And again, you guys will find those things, Instagram, email, and that cycling ebook in the show notes for this episode. Like you've heard me say before, really, really appreciate your guys' time. However you consumed this podcast, wherever you found it, however you're listening to it, thank you for being here and for tuning in. And if you would be so kind, if there was something that you liked, if there's something that you want to hear about, please go leave us a review, mention those things, and we'll be sure to try and keep more of the good stuff coming for you guys here on The Code. We'll talk to you guys next time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.